Hayes knelt in the dirt, his weathered hands pulling weeds from between rows of tomatoes. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the air on New Haven, the frontier colony world he had called home for the past 15 years. His garden was modest but well kept, a patch of green at the edge of the settlement where metal buildings gave way to open grassland. He worked slowly, his joints stiff from decades of wear. His arms bore strange scars that spiraled up from his wrists to his shoulders, patterns that looked almost like scales. More scars crossed his neck and disappeared beneath his shirt. The burns were old, faded to pale silver against his tanned skin, but they were extensive enough that people noticed. A group of children ran past on their way to school. One little girl waved, smiled and waved back, then returned to his weeding. He liked the quiet of mornings before the settlement came fully alive with its daily noise. By noon had filled his basket with fresh vegetables. He loaded them onto his small cart and pushed it down the main street toward the market. New Haven was growing. What had been a small outpost 20 years ago now had nearly 3,000 people. The street was paved now, lined with shops and houses. At the market square set up his usual spot. He arranged tomatoes, lettuce, and green beans on his table. Other vendors called out greetings. He had been selling here for years, known as a quiet man who grew good vegetables and never asked for more than fair price. "Morning," said the young colony administrator. He stopped at the table, looking tired. "How's the garden?" "Growing well," said. "The rain last week helped." Picked up a tomato, examining it. "I need to talk to you about something. They are setting up their outpost." Nodded. He had heard about the treaty. The Empire and humanity had signed an alliance agreement 3 months ago. Part of the deal involved the establishing military posts near human colonies, joint defense positions meant to protect the frontier. "When do they arrive?" asked. "They're already here. Started construction yesterday, about 5 miles north." Set down the tomato and lowered his voice. "Their commander came by my office this morning. Young fellow, very proud. Wanted to make sure we understood that his warriors are elite soldiers." "I'm sure they are," said mildly. Studied him for a moment, then bought the tomato and left. Continued setting up his display. They arrived at the market an hour later. There were 5 of them, tall reptilian beings who walked with the confidence of trained fighters. Their scales were deep green and bronze, and they wore light armor marked with military symbols. They towered over the humans in the market, their eyes scanning everything with obvious judgment. The leader was younger than the others, his scales still bright and unmarked by many scars. He carried himself like someone who had never lost a fight. His name, would learn later, was Commander. They walked through the market, examining goods with little interest. Most seemed beneath their notice. They stopped at a weapons vendor, discussing the inferior quality of human blades in their own language, a series of hisses and clicks that their translation devices rendered into human speech. One of the warriors noticed scars. He approached the vegetable stand, his eyes fixed on his arms. He called to his companions in their language. The others came over, staring. "Those are extensive scars, human," said. His translator gave his words a sharp, dismissive edge. "What battle gave you those marks?" Looked up from arranging his beans. "No battle, just old wounds." "Old wounds," repeated. He turned to his fellow warriors. "Do you see this? The human bears the marks of fire across half his body, yet claims no battle. In our culture, such scars are earned in honorable combat." "Or in accidents," another added. The group laughed. Said nothing, he continued working. "What happened, human?" pressed. "Did you fall into a furnace, mishandle a plasma torch?" He leaned closer. "Or perhaps you ran from a battle and were burned by your own cowardice." The other vendors had gone quiet. Several humans were watching now, their expressions darkening. They didn't notice or didn't care. Straightened slowly, meeting's gaze. "I don't remember asking for your opinion about my scars." "In culture, scars tell stories," said. "Yours tell me you were hurt but never fought back. That is the mark of prey, not a warrior." "Then it's a good thing I'm not trying to be a warrior," said quietly. His eyes narrowed. In his culture, this was an admission of weakness. He looked at his fellow soldiers, then back at, "Pathetic. We were told humans were fierce fighters, but I see now that was propaganda. You cannot even defend your honor with words." Picked up his basket. "I don't need to defend anything to you. If you're not buying vegetables, please move along." They laughed again. reached out and casually knocked over carefully arranged tomatoes. They rolled across the table and onto the ground, several splitting open. "Clumsy of me," said, not sounding sorry at all. Appeared from across the market, moving quickly. "Commander, that's not necessary, is a respected member of our community." Respected looked amused. "For what? Growing plants? In our empire we respect strength, courage, and honor. This one has none of these things." "You need to leave," said, his voice tight. Studied for a moment, then nodded to his warriors. They turned and walked away, still laughing among themselves. As they left, one called back, "We will call you weak flesh human, it suits you." Helped pick up the fallen tomatoes. "I'm sorry, I'll file a complaint with their command." "Don't," said. He examined a split tomato, then set it aside. "They're young, they don't know any better. They're insulting you, destroying your property." "It's a few tomatoes, not worth starting an incident over." Began rearranging what remained of his display. "We need this alliance. The frontier needs the protection. Don't let an old man's pride get in the way of that." Looked frustrated but nodded. He knew well enough to know that arguing would lead nowhere. That evening, after the market closed, pushed his cart back to his small house at the edge of the settlement. He unloaded what he hadn't sold and put everything away in his kitchen. Then he sat in his worn chair and looked at the photograph on the shelf. It showed a much younger, maybe 25 years old, wearing military uniform. He stood beside something massive, a creature with dragon-like features and scales that gleamed even in the faded photo. The image was labeled with a date and location. Dragon Wars, Year 3, Sector. There was a knock at his door. Set down the photo and opened it to find Mills, the colony doctor. She was in her 60s, one of the few people on New Haven who had been here as long as. "I heard about what happened at the market," she said. "News travels fast." "It always does." She came inside without being invited, a privilege of old friendship. "You should report it." "I told the same thing I'm telling you. It's not worth it." Sat down across from him. She looked at the photo on the shelf, the one she had seen many times before. "They don't know what those scars mean." "No, they don't, and that's fine." "Is it?" Leaned forward. "You can't let them treat you like this." "I can and I will." His voice was gentle but firm. "Those days are over. I left that life behind. I chose this one, growing vegetables and living quiet. I'm not going to throw that away because some young soldiers don't understand respect." "They called you a coward." "Let them." Shook her head. "You're a better person than I am." "I'm just an old man who's tired of fighting." Stood and walked to his window, looking out at his garden in the fading light. "They're young. They've probably never seen real combat. They have their pride and their culture. That's important to them. Who am I to take that away?" "You're Hayes," said quietly. He turned to look at her. "Not anymore. That person is gone. Now I'm just a gardener." Left soon after, still unhappy but accepting his choice. Locked his door and prepared for bed. Before he slept, he looked once more at the old photograph, at the young soldier he had been. Those scars the mocked had stories. Stories of fire and blood, of creatures that should not have existed, of battles fought in the darkness between stars. Stories of friends who never came home. The harassment did not stop. Over the next 3 weeks, the warriors made their favorite target whenever they visited the settlement. They would walk past his market stand and knock things over, calling it accidents. They bumped into him on the street, then mocked him when he stepped aside rather than confronting them. The name they had given him spread through the outpost. Weak flesh. Other soldiers began using it, even those who had never met. To them, he became a joke, a story they told about the pathetic human who bore warrior scars but had no warrior spirit. Endured it all in silence. "This is getting out of hand," said one morning. He stood in his garden watching the old man work. "They're calling the entire settlement the village of the coward. It's affecting our relationship with their command." Pulled a weed and tossed it aside. "Let them talk." "I can't just let them talk. I'm responsible for this colony." Ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Yesterday, 3 warriors came to my office demanding better quarters because they refused to live near cowards. Their words, not mine." "What did you tell them?" "I told them the quarters were adequate and non-negotiable." Watched work for a moment. "A naval ship is docking today. Captain Seth Morgan is visiting to inspect the Alliance progress." His hands paused for just a second, then continued working. "I see." You know him. I know of him. Navy man, good record. Studied's face, but the old man gave nothing away. Will you at least come to the welcome dinner tonight? Show some unity. I don't think that's a good idea. Please, I need people there who won't make this worse. Sighed, fine, I'll come. The dinner was held in the colony's main hall. About 50 people attended, humans and mixing awkwardly. The stood in one group, the humans in another, with only the officials attempting conversation between them. Arrived quietly and found a seat in the back. He wore his cleanest shirt, though it couldn't hide the scars on his neck and arms. Captain Seth Morgan entered with his officers. He was a trim man in his 50s, his naval uniform crisp and decorated with service ribbons. His eyes swept the room and stopped when they found. For a moment, Morgan simply stared. Then he nodded slightly, a gesture of recognition and respect that he clearly didn't want to make obvious. Nodded back. Commander noticed the exchange. He approached Morgan with interest. Captain, do you know that human, the one in the back? Morgan's expression became carefully neutral. I've seen him around the colony. He is the coward we told you about, weak flesh. Seemed pleased to share this information. He bears marks of fire but refuses to say how he earned them. In our culture, this means he is ashamed of his weakness. Is that so? Morgan's voice was flat. Yes, it is good you know this, so you do not mistake him for someone worthy of respect. Turned to his sister, who had just joined them. Tell the captain about our encounter with the coward yesterday. Was younger than her brother but carried herself with more thoughtfulness. She glanced at, then back to Morgan. We encountered him at the market. My brother challenged him to a sparring match. He refused, of course, said, laughing. I declared him under law, now any may disrespect him without consequence. Morgan's jaw tightened. I see. You disapprove, Captain? Asked. She was watching Morgan carefully, reading his reaction. I disapprove of judging people without knowing their full story, Morgan said carefully. But your customs are your own. The dinner proceeded awkwardly, ate little and spoke to no one. He left early, walking back to his house under the colony's artificial lights. He didn't see the teenager following him until Danny caught up. Mr. Hayes, wait, Danny called. Stopped. Danny was 16, the son of 2 engineers who worked on the colony's power systems. He was a good kid, curious and smart. What do you need, Danny? I want to know why you let them treat you like that. Danny's face was flushed with anger. They're insulting you, they're insulting all of us. It's just words. It's not just words. They destroyed part of your garden yesterday, I saw them. They walked through it on purpose, crushing your plants. Had noticed half his bean row was ruined. I'll replant. Why won't you fight back? Danny demanded. Even if you just told them off, stood up to them, anything. Because fighting doesn't solve everything, Danny. Sometimes the smart choice is to walk away. That's what cowards say. The words hung in the air between them. Danny immediately looked sorry he had said it, but he didn't take it back. Just nodded slowly. Maybe you're right, go home, Danny, it's late. He left the boy standing there and continued to his house. But Danny didn't go home. He went to the colony's records office. The office was supposed to be locked at night, but Danny knew the security code because his mother worked there. He slipped inside and accessed the computer system. He searched for Hayes. The basic file came up first. Age 68. Arrived on New Haven 15 years ago. Former military, honorably discharged. No family listed. Occupation, farmer and gardener. Danny dug deeper. He found service records, but most were sealed, classified. He tried different searches, using keywords like scars, burns, military service. Finally, he found something. A brief mention in a historical database about the Dragon Wars, a conflict from 47 years ago. The article was short, mostly redacted, but it mentioned specialized units. One was called the 7th Dragon Division. Danny searched for that division. The file was heavily classified, but the basic information was there. The 7th Dragon Division had been a special operations unit during the Dragon Wars. Their mission was classified. Their survival rate was listed as 18%. And there in the roster of surviving members was a name, Colonel Hayes. Colonel, not private or sergeant, Colonel. Danny stared at the screen. He tried to access more information about what had done, what the Dragon Division was, but everything else was locked behind military encryption he couldn't break. He printed what he could and left the office, his mind racing. The next morning, Danny found in his garden, already working despite the early hour. "You were a colonel," Danny said without greeting. Looked up, he saw the papers in Danny's hand and sighed. "You went through the records. Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because it doesn't matter anymore," stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "That was a long time ago, Danny." "The Dragon Wars, what were they?" "Ancient history." "The don't think so. I looked them up too. Emperor himself fought in those wars, he's famous for it." His expression shifted slightly. He would be. "So why do you let his soldiers mock you? You outrank all of them. You probably outrank their commander." "Military rank means nothing now. The wars are over." "But they should know," Danny insisted. "They should know who you are, what you did." No, his voice was firm. "They shouldn't. Those of us who survived the Dragon Wars, we made a choice, Danny. We chose to let that life go. We chose peace. Dredging up the past doesn't help anyone. Even if they're destroying your garden, ruining your life." "My life isn't ruined. I have a home, food, work I enjoy. That's more than many people get." Put a hand on Danny's shoulder. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but trust me on this. Let it go." Danny wanted to argue more, but something inside stopped him. There was old pain there, buried deep but never truly gone. He left, taking his papers with him, but he wasn't satisfied. That afternoon, news arrived that shook the entire outpost. Emperor himself would be visiting the sector. The message came through official channels. The Emperor was touring the frontier, inspecting the new Alliance outposts and meeting with human colony leaders. His route would bring him to New Haven in 2 weeks. Commander practically vibrated with excitement and nervousness. The Emperor was legendary among. Over 400 years old, he had personally unified their empire through combat and strategy. Meeting him was the highest honor a young warrior could receive. Preparations began immediately. The outpost was cleaned and reorganized. Warriors practiced their formations, personally reviewed every detail, determined to make a perfect impression. Heard about the visit but paid it little attention. He had more immediate concerns. The warriors, emboldened by his declaration of status, had escalated their harassment. They had painted the word coward on his house in large letters. Spent a morning scrubbing it off, working steadily while neighbors watched with anger and sympathy. Came by and offered to file an official complaint. "No," said, scrubbing at the paint. "It's fine." "It's not fine. This crosses a line. The Emperor is coming. Let's not create an incident right before that." Looked at. "Please, trust me." Left unhappy, but he respected his wishes. That evening, visited again. She found repairing the damaged section of his garden, replanting beans where they had trampled them. "I heard about the paint," she said. "It's off now. This has to stop." "It will. Eventually they'll get bored and find someone else to bother." Sat on his porch step, watching him work. "When the Emperor comes, we'll probably parade you around as an example of human weakness." "Let him. For someone who fought in the Dragon Wars, you're awfully passive now." His hands stilled, he looked at her. "You know." "I've always known. I was a military doctor before I came here. I treated Dragon Division survivors." She met his eyes. "I know what those scars mean. I know what you faced." They sat in silence for a long moment. "Then you understand why I don't want to go back to that," said finally. "I do, but I also think there's a difference between living in peace and letting people walk all over you." The day Emperor arrived, the entire outpost stood at attention. His ship descended from orbit without fanfare, a sleek vessel marked with the Imperial seal but lacking the usual decorative elements Younger preferred. It landed in the designated zone, and the door opened. Emperor stepped out, and even Commander felt his confidence waver. The Emperor was massive, even by standards. His scales were deep bronze, darkened by age, and covered in countless scars. Each mark told a story of battles fought and survived. His eyes were ancient, carrying the weight of 4 centuries of life and leadership. He moved with slow, deliberate grace. Not the swagger of youth, but the assured power of someone who had nothing left to prove. Led the formal greeting, bowing deeply. "Your Imperial Majesty, it is the highest honor to receive you at our outpost." Studied him for a moment. "Commander, your name." Your Majesty, third-generation warrior, elite tactical division. Third generation, repeated. His tone was neutral, but something in it made feel suddenly very young and very inexperienced. You have seen combat. Training exercises, Your Majesty. Border patrols, no active war in my lifetime. Fortunate for you, the Emperor looked past to the assembled warriors. You all appear well-trained, that is good. Peace requires readiness. The formal inspection of the outpost took an hour. Asked questions, examined equipment, and spoke briefly with various soldiers. He seemed satisfied with what he saw, but showed little emotion. Then he surprised everyone. I wish to tour the human settlement, he announced. Blinked, Your Majesty, that was not on the schedule. We have prepared a formal dinner here at the outpost. The dinner can wait. I came to observe the alliance in action. That means seeing how our peoples interact in daily life, not at carefully arranged ceremonies. Looked at with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Unless you have a reason, I should not see the settlement. No, Your Majesty, of course not, scrambled to adjust. I will lead the tour personally. They walked to New Haven, a group of 10 including the Emperor and several honor guards. Human colonists stopped and stared as the Emperor passed. Word spread quickly and rushed to meet them at the settlement entrance. Your Imperial Majesty, said, slightly out of breath. We weren't expecting you so soon. Welcome to New Haven. Administrator, said, clearly having been briefed. I apologize for the short notice. I prefer to see places as they truly are, not as they appear when prepared for inspection. Of course, would you like a tour? Commander has offered to show me around. He is familiar with your colony, I believe. Straightened with pride. Yes, Your Majesty, I have visited many times. They walked through the main street, pointed out various buildings, explaining the human settlement's layout and function. He spoke about the colony's resources, its defensive capabilities, and its strategic importance to the frontier. As they walked, also spoke about the humans themselves. They are hard workers, Your Majesty, but they lack the warrior culture of our people. They value comfort and safety over honor and strength. He gestured to the shops and houses. They build for peace, not for war. Building for peace is not a failing, said quietly. Of course not, Your Majesty. I only mean they are different from us. Continued walking. There is one human here who exemplifies their weakness, a one who claims no battle, shows no pride, accepts disrespect without response. Does he? His tone was mild, but his eyes sharpened slightly. Yes, we call him weak flesh. He has extensive burn scars but refuses to say how he earned them. When challenged, he backs down. When insulted, he simply walks away. Shook his head. In our culture, such behavior is shameful. Where is this human now? Asked. Likely at his home or his garden. He keeps to himself mostly. Seemed pleased to share this information with his emperor. We have been teaching him about honor, but he is too old and set in his ways to learn. They continued the tour. Asked questions about the alliance, about trade, about the daily interactions between humans, and answered confidently, believing the tour was going well. Then they turned onto a street. The route had not been planned to go this way, but had asked to see the residential areas. Led them down the quieter streets where colonists lived in modest houses surrounded by small yards. Was in his garden. He knelt in the dirt, his back to the street, working on the replanted bean section. His arms moved steadily as he cleared weeds and checked the young plants. He wore a simple work shirt and old pants, looking like any other retired colonist spending time on his hobby. The imperial procession passed by, heard the footsteps and voices. He glanced over his shoulder, saw the group of, and immediately recognized the elaborate markings on the largest one's armor. An emperor, he had seen those markings before, though in different circumstances. Simply nodded respectfully and returned to his work. He had no interest in ceremonies or politics. Let them walk past. Let them continue their tour. But they did not walk past. Seeing an opportunity to demonstrate his earlier point, spoke up. Your Majesty, that is the human I mentioned, the coward. Heard this but did not react. He had heard worse over the past weeks. Stopped walking. The entire procession halted behind him. The Emperor stood completely still, staring its back at the visible scars on his arms and neck. Human, said, his voice carried a weight that made everyone pay attention. Stand and face me. Sighed quietly. He set down his small shovel, brushed dirt from his hands, and stood. He turned to face the Emperor, his expression neutral and respectful but not fearful. His ancient eyes moved from his face to his arms, studying the scars with intense focus. The spiral patterns, the way they crossed and overlapped, the specific texture of old burned tissue. "Remove your shirt," the Emperor commanded. Hesitated, this was not a reasonable request, and he knew it. But the Emperor's tone made it clear this was important, not casual cruelty like mockery. Slowly pulled off his work shirt. The watching drew in sharp breaths. His eyes widened, even looked shocked. The scars covered his chest, shoulders, and back. They were extensive, forming complex patterns that spiraled and intersected. Some were thin lines, others were broad patches of scar tissue. All were clearly from severe burns, healed over many years. Stepped closer. His movements were slow, almost reverent. He examined the scars on his right arm, then his shoulder, then his chest. His expression, normally unreadable, showed something close to shock. "Fire," the Emperor whispered, his voice carried in the sudden silence. "These are burns from fire." Frowned, confused. "Your Majesty, what is fire?" Did not answer immediately. He was still studying scars, his eyes tracing the patterns. "Sustained exposure, multiple encounters." He looked up its face. "You fought them. You fought the dragons." Met the Emperor's gaze, but said nothing. "In the Dragon Wars," continued, "you were there." "I was there," confirmed quietly. The watching exchanged confused looks, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, what are you talking about? What are the dragons?" Finally looked away from to address the crowd. "The Dragon Wars occurred 47 years ago. They lasted 4 years. In that time, the dragons have emerged from their hidden world and attacked the galaxy." He turned back to, "They were massive creatures, intelligent and fierce. Their breath was fire hot enough to melt starship hulls. Their scales deflected most energy weapons. They destroyed 14 worlds before we stopped them." Was staring at now, his earlier confidence crumbling. "I have heard stories of those wars, but they are legends from before my birth." "They are real history," said sharply. "I fought in those wars myself. I earned my title of Dragon Emperor by defeating 3 of the in single combat." He gestured to, "These scars this human bears, they come from dragon fire, from close combat with the..." Remained silent, standing shirtless in his garden while the Emperor explained his scars to an audience he had never wanted. Moved closer again, pointing to a specific pattern on his left arm. "This mark here, this is what fire does when it touches flesh for more than a few seconds. Most beings die from such exposure. Those who survive carry marks like these." He traced his finger just above the scar, not touching. "And this pattern, the way it spirals, this happens only when dragon fire wraps around a limb. It means you were grabbed, held in the flames, and somehow survived." Looked pale. "Your Majesty, I did not know." Clearly, his voice was cold. He turned to face the young commander. "You called this warrior a coward, you mocked his scars, you declared him without honor." "I thought he was ashamed of them," said weakly. "He bears marks that 90% of warriors who faced the did not survive to receive." His eyes were hard. "I have seen these patterns on only 2 other beings in my 400 years. Both are dead now, killed by their wounds years after the wars ended. This human stands before you alive, working in a garden, after surviving what killed almost everyone else who faced it." The Emperor turned back to, "How many dragons did you face?" Looked uncomfortable. "I don't remember the exact number." "Estimate?" "Maybe 20, maybe more. The battles blur together." 20, the word hung in the air. Had never faced a real threat in his life. Most of his warriors had never seen true combat. This quiet human had fought 20 dragons and lived. Studied for a long moment. "Why did you not speak? When they mocked you, when they called you coward, why did you not tell them what these scars truly mean?" Looked at his garden, at his house, at the simple life he had built. "Because the war is over, Your Majesty, I chose peace. Letting young warriors have their pride seemed a small price to pay for that peace." The Emperor's expression shifted. Something like respect, or perhaps recognition, entered his ancient eyes. "You chose silence over pride." "I chose quiet over conflict." Was quiet for a moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone present. He bowed to, not deeply, but enough to show genuine respect. "You are a rare being," the Emperor said. "Rarer than you know." Looked uncomfortable with the attention. May I put my shirt back on, Your Majesty? Yes, forgive my intrusion. It was necessary. Pulled his shirt on, covering the scars once more. He looked at whose earlier arrogance had completely vanished. The young commander looked stricken. I apologize, said, his voice barely above a whisper. I did not understand. I could not have known. You could have asked, said simply, instead of assuming. Nodded slowly. A lesson worth learning. He looked at his honor guard. We will continue the tour. As they prepared to leave, the Emperor paused and looked back at. What was your rank? Colonel. Your unit. That evening, Emperor requested a private meeting in the colony's main hall. Not private in the sense of being alone, but private from casual observers. Present were Captain Morgan, who had remained on New Haven, and a handful of senior officers, including and his sister. The Emperor sat at the head of a long table, sat across from him, looking more uncomfortable than he had, facing mockery. I want the full story, said. Not for gossip or glory, for understanding. These young warriors need to learn what real war looks like. They need to understand what they have been mocking. Shook his head. Your Majesty, with respect, the past should stay buried. Perhaps, but it refuses to stay buried when young fools dig it up with their ignorance. Gestured to who looked at the floor. They have made you their target. They have spread stories about your cowardice. Now they must hear the truth. Spoke up. I can access your military records. With Imperial override codes, even the classified sections will open. Don't, said. I must, replied quietly. This is bigger than your privacy now. The alliance between our peoples requires mutual understanding. That includes understanding who we are and what we have survived. Closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. Worked on a portable terminal for several minutes. Files appeared on the wall screen, official records from 47 years ago. Much was still redacted, blacked out for security reasons, but enough remained to tell a story. The Dragon Wars began in 2178, read. The species emerged from there for the first time in recorded history. Initial contact was hostile, 3 survey ships destroyed with all hands. The screen showed images. Massive reptilian creatures with wings and armored scales, breathing fire that burned white-hot. Cities reduced to ash, ships torn apart. Within 3 months, 14 worlds were destroyed, continued. Total casualties estimated at 40 million beings. They showed no interest in negotiation. They attacked any ship or settlement they encountered. Spoke up. The Empire initially refused to engage. We saw thee as kindred fellow reptilian warriors. We thought we could negotiate. His voice was bitter. We were wrong. They attacked our colony at 500,000 dead in a single day. That changed the war, said. The major powers formed a coalition. Humanity, the Empire, the collective, but standard weapons were ineffective. Energy weapons reflected off scales. Missiles could not catch them in flight. They were too fast, too strong, too resistant to damage. Captain Morgan finally spoke. So Earth's military command tried something different. Close combat specialists. Units trained to fight the dragons on the ground, using kinetic weapons and experimental armor. The Dragon Divisions, said softly. Pulled up new files. 7 Dragon Divisions were formed, volunteers only. The survival rate in training alone was 50%. Many recruits died learning to fight something that should not be possible to fight. The screen showed young soldiers in heavy armor, carrying weapons that looked more like tools for killing monsters than modern military equipment. Among them was a much younger Hayes, his face serious, his body not yet marked by scars. Lieutenant Hayes volunteered for the 7th Dragon Division at age 22, read. He was a decorated soldier before volunteering, with combat experience in the border conflicts. His psychological evaluation noted high pain tolerance, exceptional tactical thinking, and a tendency towards self-sacrifice for mission success. Stared at the table, not looking at his younger self on the screen. The 7th Division's first deployment was on Prime, the 4th world the Dragons attacked, continued. Objective was to defend civilian evacuations while regular forces engaged the Dragons in space. Lieutenant Hayes led a squad of 12 soldiers. The screen showed mission reports, dry clinical language describing absolute chaos. Dragon attacks, fire everywhere, soldiers burning. Squad held a landing zone for 6 hours while civilian ships escaped. Of his 12 soldiers, 4 survived. Hayes was promoted to captain after that mission, said. Given command of a full company, 50 soldiers. More battles followed on the screen. Each one was hell, fighting massive creatures in close quarters using experimental weapons that sometimes worked and sometimes exploded. Watching friends die in dragon fire, holding positions that should have been impossible to hold. The scars on his arms came from the Battle of Thresh Ridge, said quietly. She had pulled up medical records. He was grabbed by a dragon and held in its flames for approximately 45 seconds while his squad evacuated wounded. Third-degree burns over 30% of his body. He should have died. But he didn't, said, studying his face. No, he recovered despite doctor recommendations that he retire. He returned to combat 3 months later. His voice was tight with old emotion. I was the doctor who cleared him, against my better judgment. Continued reading. Hayes was promoted to major, then to lieutenant colonel. By year 3 of the war, he was one of the most experienced dragon fighters alive. Most of the original Dragon Division volunteers were dead. Hayes trained the new recruits. The screen showed a mission designation that made sit up, the final assault. Yes, said quietly, it was the first time he had spoken since the briefing began. That was the last battle. Pulled up the mission details. By year 4, the coalition had learned enough about to plan an assault on there. The strategy was to strike at their breeding grounds, to end the war by making continuation impossible. I was there, said. I led the ground forces, 5,000 warriors. The 7th Dragon Division sent 200 soldiers, read. Colonel Hayes commanded them. The room was silent, 200 humans against an entire world of dragons. We knew it was likely a one-way trip, said, his voice distant. But we went anyway, the war had to end. Captain Morgan spoke. I was a junior officer on one of the orbital support ships. We watched the ground battle through satellites. I have never seen anything like it before or since. The defended there with everything they had, said. Hundreds of dragons, all fighting with the desperation of a species facing extinction. The battle lasted 3 days. Brought up casualty reports. The numbers were staggering. Of the 5,000 warriors, less than 2,000 survived. Of the 200 human Dragon Division soldiers, only 7 made it off the planet alive. Was one of them? Your scars on your back and chest came from that battle, said, looking at medical records. You were caught in a dragon's death throes. It wrapped around you and burned for over a minute before dying. You suffered 4th-degree burns in multiple locations. Complete skin loss, nerve damage. You were in a medical coma for 2 months. Stared at the records in horror. He had mocked a man who had survived being burned alive by a dying dragon. When Hayes woke up, he refused reconstructive surgery for the scars, continued. He said he wanted to remember, wanted to carry the marks of what happened. And then he retired, said. Honorably discharged with full honors, he disappeared from public record. No one knew where he went. I came here, said simply, to New Haven, to a quiet place where I could grow vegetables and not think about fire. Leaned forward. In the final assault, I saw human soldiers do things I thought impossible. I saw them stand against dragons when any sane being would run. I saw them die protecting wounded they had never met. He looked at. I saw one human soldier hold off 2 dragons alone while a civilian ship escaped. That soldier was burned so badly I thought he must be dead. Was that you? Met his eyes. I don't remember. There were a lot of dragons that day. It was you, Captain Morgan said quietly. I was on that civilian ship. I was 20 years old, fresh from academy, and I watched through the viewport as a human in dragon armor fought 2 dragons with nothing but a kinetic rifle and a knife. I thought I was watching someone die heroically. Instead, I watched someone refuse to die at all. The room was silent. Spoke for the first time. How did you survive? Stubbornness mostly, said, and good armor and luck, mostly luck. The report says you killed both dragons, said, reading from the screen. The report is generous. I wounded them enough that they retreated. Then I passed out from the burns. Stood and walked to the window, looking out at New Haven's lights. After the war ended, I returned to the Empire expecting to be celebrated. Instead, I found that war had changed me. I had seen too much death. I understood that glory was not worth the cost we had paid. He turned back to, yet I remained emperor, I remained a warrior. I could not leave it behind as you did. You had responsibilities, said. I didn't. I was just a soldier. When the war ended, I was free to choose peace. And you chose silence when mocked, chose humility when you could have chosen pride. Returned to his seat. That is harder than any battle. Finally spoke, his voice shaking. I called you a coward, I destroyed your property, I declared you without honor. He stood and bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect in culture. I am the one without honor. I judged what I did not understand. I mocked what I should have revered. You're young, said. You didn't know. I should have known enough to ask, to learn before judging, remained bowing. I have no excuse for my behavior. Looked at the young commander, then at, May I speak plainly, your majesty? Please do. These young warriors have never seen real war. That's good. That means the war accomplished something. They can afford to have pride and play at being warriors because they've never faced actual dragons. Stood. I don't want them to learn humility by experiencing what I experienced. I want them to stay ignorant. I want them to live in a galaxy where dragons are legends, not nightmares. A kind sentiment, said, but they must learn respect. Then teach them, but don't teach them by making them relive horrors they're lucky enough to have never faced. Looked at. You're forgiven. Learn from this and move on. Straightened slowly, his eyes wet. In culture, such easy forgiveness was almost unheard of. It made the shame cut deeper. The galaxy should know your story, said. You're a hero. I'm a survivor, corrected. The heroes died on that planet. I just happened to live. Studied him for a long moment. Tomorrow I will hold a formal ceremony. You will receive the star of the highest honor the Empire grants. Only 11 beings have received it in 400 years. You will be the 12th. I don't want it. This is not for you. This is for them. Gestured to the young officers. They need to see what true honor looks like. They need to understand that the quiet gardener they mocked has earned more respect than they will in their entire lives. Wanted to argue, but saw the determination in the Emperor's ancient eyes. This was going to happen whether he agreed or not. Fine, he said quietly. But after the ceremony I go back to my garden, back to being left alone. The morning of the ceremony woke before dawn. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, dreading what was coming. For 15 years he had lived quietly, anonymously. Today that would end. He rose and made coffee, then sat on his porch watching the sun rise over his garden. The bean plants he had replanted were growing well. The tomatoes needed watering, normal things, simple things, the things he had built his new life around. A knock came at his door at 8 in the morning. Stood outside holding a military uniform. Where did you get that? Asked. Captain Morgan kept it. He's been carrying it around for years, hoping to return it to you someday. She held it out. It's yours, you should wear it. Looked at the uniform. It was old from before he retired, but still in good condition. His rank insignia, his division patch, his service ribbons, the physical proof of a life he had left behind. I don't want to wear that anymore, he said. I know, but today isn't about what you want. It's about what those young warriors need to see. His expression softened. One day, wear it for one day, then you can put it away forever. He took the uniform. By noon, the entire colony had gathered in the central square. Nearly 3,000 humans stood in organized rows. The outpost had brought all personnel, over 500 warriors standing at attention in their formal armor. A platform had been erected in the center. Emperor stood upon it, flanked by his honor guard, and other colony officials stood to one side. Captain Morgan and his officers stood to the other. Approached from his house, walking alone, he wore the uniform had brought. It fit differently than it had 47 years ago in some places, looser in others, but it still fit. His colonel's insignia caught the sunlight. His division patch, a dragon pierced by a sword, stood out against the dark fabric. The crowd parted as he walked. Humans who had known him only as a quiet gardener now saw him as something else. Warriors who had mocked him now stood rigid with shame and respect. Climbed the steps to the platform. He stood before Emperor and came to attention, muscle memory from decades ago taking over. His salute was crisp and precise. Returned the salute, then gestured for to stand at ease. People of New Haven, the Emperor began, his voice carrying across the silent square. Warriors, today we gather to correct a grave injustice and to honor a debt that should have been paid decades ago. He turned to, Colonel Hayes fought in the Dragon Wars. Many of you are too young to remember those conflicts. Some of you have heard only stories. Allow me to tell you the truth. Spoke about the war. not in the dry clinical terms of the reports, but in the vivid language of someone who had been there. He described the dragons, their size and ferocity. He described the destruction they caused, the worlds they burned, the millions who died. Humanity formed special units to fight these creatures, continued. The dragon divisions, volunteers who knew they were likely going to die, they fought anyway because someone had to. He pulled up holographic displays, images from the war, young soldiers in heavy armor facing creatures that dwarfed them, battle scenes that looked more like nightmares than history. Colonel Hayes was one of these volunteers. At age 22, he joined the 7th Dragon Division. Over the next 4 years, he participated in 17 major dragon engagements. He led soldiers into battles that military historians still study as examples of impossible odds overcome through courage and skill. The hologram showed a specific battle, younger and unmarked, standing with his squad. Then the same location hours later, bodies everywhere, only 4 soldiers still standing, was one of them. He was promoted through the ranks not because of politics or favoritism, but because he survived when others did not, because he led when others could not, because he fought when any sane being would have run. His voice grew harder. And recently, in this very colony, young warriors who have never faced a single day of real combat called this man a coward. Stood in the front row of warriors, his head bowed in shame. Several other young who had participated in the mockery looked equally distressed. These scars, gestured to, are from dragon fire. This burn pattern occurs only from sustained, close exposure to flames hot enough to melt steel. Most beings die within seconds of such exposure. Colonel Hayes survived minutes of it, multiple times. He showed medical records on the hologram, images of injuries, clinical photographs that made several people in the crowd look away. Burns so severe that bone was visible in places. Skin charred black. Survival should have been impossible. The final battle of the Dragon Wars was the assault on the said. I was there. I led 5,000 warriors. Colonel Hayes led 200 human soldiers. We went to end the war by striking at the dragon breeding grounds. The hologram showed the battle. Chaos and fire and death on a scale that made current warfare look tame by comparison. Of my 5,000 warriors, less than 2,000 survived. Of Colonel Hayes's 200 soldiers, only 7 returned alive. The colonel himself was burned so badly that doctors believed he would die. He survived anyway. Then he retired, left the military, and came here to grow vegetables in peace. Turned to face directly. When mocked by warriors who have never bled, you said nothing. When your property was destroyed, you did not retaliate. When called a coward by those who could not comprehend one day of what you survived for 4 years, you chose silence. He paused. Why? Had known this question was coming. He had prepared no answer because he had no simple explanation. But standing here in his old uniform in front of thousands of people, he tried. Because the war is over, he said quietly. His voice was rough, unpracticed at public speaking. Because those young warriors have never had to face dragons, that's good. That means something we did worked. They get to live in a galaxy where dragons are just stories. He looked at, I didn't want to take that away from them. I didn't want them to look at me and see the war. I wanted them to see a gardener because that's what I am now. The soldier died on that planet. The gardener survived. The soldier did not die, said firmly. The soldier chose peace. That is different. That is harder. He reached into a ceremonial box held by one of his guards. From it, he a medallion on a ribbon. The star of made from actual dragon scales formed into a star pattern hung from crimson silk. The star of is the highest honor the Empire grants. It is given only to those who have defeated the dragons in personal combat. In 400 years, 11 beings have received this honor. Most are dead now, killed by their wounds or by age. You are the 12th recipient and only the 2nd human. Place the medallion around his neck. It was heavier than it looked, the dragon scales cool against his chest even through his uniform. With this comes a title, Dragon Slayer. You are now formally recognized by the Empire as a warrior of the highest caliber. All, regardless of rank, are required to show you respect. Stood still, uncomfortable with the weight of honor he had never asked for. Stepped back and bowed. A full bow the kind emperors gave to no one. Behind him, every in the square bowed as well. 500 warriors showing respect to a human gardener. The humans didn't bow, but many saluted. Captain Morgan saluted with tears in his eyes. finally able to honor the man who had saved his life 47 years ago. The ceremony continued, spoke more about the war, about sacrifice, about the price of peace. He spoke directly to the young warriors, teaching them that true strength was not found in mockery or pride, but in understanding and respect. When he finished, was allowed to leave the platform, he walked down the steps, planning to return home and never speak of this again. But stopped him. The young commander knelt before a position of absolute submission in his culture. I have no words that can undo my dishonor. I mocked a hero. I destroyed the property of someone who fought for a galaxy I now live in peacefully. I am ashamed beyond measure. Looked down at him, was young, maybe 30 in human years. His scales were unmarked by real combat. He had lived his entire life in the peace that's generation had paid for in blood. Stand up, said. Stood but kept his eyes down. You made a mistake, you learned from it. That's what young warriors are supposed to do. His voice was kind but firm. I forgive you, now forgive yourself and be better. How can I make this right? Go back to your outpost, train your warriors, protect this sector. When the next threat comes, and it will be ready, that's how you make it right. Looked up, seeing something in his eyes that he hadn't noticed before. Not anger or resentment, but genuine care. This old human wanted him to be better, not for revenge, but for the simple reason that the galaxy needed good warriors. I will, promised. I swear it. Over the following days, life in New Haven changed. The warriors who had harassed now went out of their way to help him. They repaired his garden, fixing damage they had caused and adding improvements he hadn't asked for. They stood guard when he worked, not because he needed protection, but because they felt they owed him. Tolerated it for a week, then finally had to speak with. This has to stop, he said, gesturing to the 3 warriors currently weeding his tomato patch. They wish to make amends, explained. They're going to smother my plants with kindness. I appreciate the thought, but I need to work my own garden. But they feel they must serve someone of your status. My status is gardener, not hero, not dragon slayer, gardener, pointed to his house. I want to go back to being left alone, that's all I've ever wanted. Considered this. What if we compromise? My warriors can visit, but only to learn, not to serve. Learn what? About the war, about sacrifice, about choosing peace. Looked at his warriors, young and proud and ignorant of real combat. They need to understand what you understand. That peace is not weakness. Thought about this? Teaching was different from being worshipped. Teaching might actually serve a purpose. Once a week, he said. You can bring a small group, we'll talk, but we also work. Anyone who comes to learn also helps in the garden. Deal. Deal. So began a strange new routine. Every week, a handful of warriors would visit his garden. They would work alongside him, planting and weeding and harvesting, and while they worked, would talk. He didn't tell war stories for glory. He talked about the reality of combat, about fear and loss and the weight of watching friends die. He talked about why wars should be avoided when possible and fought fiercely when necessary. He talked about the difference between honor and pride, between courage and foolishness. The young warriors listened and learned. Became a regular visitor. She was genuinely interested in understanding rather than just hearing about glory. She asked difficult questions about moral choices in combat, about when to fight and when to show mercy. How did you know when the war was truly over? She asked one afternoon while helping tie up tomato plants. When we had achieved our objective, stopped the dragons from destroying more worlds. Once that was done, continuing to fight would have been revenge, not defense. But they had killed millions of your people. Didn't you want revenge? Wanting it and acting on it are different things. We wanted a lot of things. We wanted our friends back. We wanted the destroyed worlds restored. We wanted it to never have happened. Secured a vine to its stake. We couldn't have any of those things, but we could choose not to create more suffering, so we did. These conversations spread. Other began attending, drawn by rumors that the old human was teaching wisdom their own culture didn't provide. The once-a-week sessions became twice weekly, then 3 times. Emperor, before leaving New Haven, visited privately one final time. You are teaching them things I never could, the Emperor said. They sat on his porch, watching the garden grow in the evening light. You're an emperor, you have responsibilities. I also have pride. I'm still drawn to conflict, still believe in the warrior path. Looked at his hands. You found a way to let it go, to truly choose peace. I envy that. You're still fighting, Your Majesty, just a different kind of dragon. What do you mean? The dragon now is staying at peace when you have the power to make war. It's fighting your own nature instead of external enemies. Looked at the old emperor. That's the hardest battle, the one against yourself. Was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled, a rare expression. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps I should learn from your example. You're 400 years old. I doubt I can teach you much. Age does not equal wisdom. You proved that. Stood to leave. I am adding one more provision to the alliance treaty. Any who wishes may visit New Haven to learn from you. This garden will become a teaching ground. That sounds like a lot of visitors. You can refuse any who annoy you, but I suspect you will accept more than you think. The Emperor paused at the steps. Thank you, Colonel Hayes, for everything you did in the war and for everything you are doing now. After he left, sat alone on his porch. The Star of Medallion hung inside his house, in a drawer where he didn't have to look at it. His old uniform was folded away. Tomorrow he would return to his normal clothes, his normal life. But something had changed. He had spent 15 years trying to bury the past completely. Now he understood that the past couldn't be buried, only transformed. He couldn't change what he had been, but he could shape what it meant. The soldier hadn't died. He had just found a new mission. Teaching the next generation that peace was worth fighting for, worth choosing, worth maintaining even when pride said otherwise. Danny appeared the next morning, looking nervous. Mr. Hayes, I wanted to apologize. For what? For calling you a coward, for not trusting that you knew what you were doing. Smiled, you were protecting someone you cared about. That's not something to apologize for, but thank you. Can I help in the garden too? Not to learn about war, just to learn about growing things. Of course, grab a shovel. They worked together in comfortable silence, human and young human, planting seeds for vegetables that would grow in peace. Across the garden, a dragon scale hung above store. Not a trophy of war, but a reminder that even the fiercest dragons could be laid to rest. A reminder that peace was possible, even after unimaginable violence. A reminder that sometimes the bravest choice was not to fight at all. Knelt in the soil, his hands working the earth, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but purpose. He was still a soldier in his way, still fighting for something important. He was fighting for the right of young warriors like to remain ignorant of real war. Fighting to maintain a peace hard-won and easily lost. Fighting to teach that true strength lay not in conquest, but in restraint. It was a quieter battle than the Dragon Wars, but in its own way, it was just as important. The sun rose higher. More visitors would come soon, warriors seeking to understand the old human who had survived the impossible. Would teach them, not because he wanted glory, but because they needed to learn. The war was over. The peace had begun. And Hayes, once a colonel, once a dragon slayer, now a gardener, would guard that peace with the same ferocity he had once used to end the war. Just in a different way, a quieter way, a way that grew things instead of destroying them. He smiled and continued working, his dragon scars catching the morning light, badges of honor he had never asked for but finally accepted. Not as marks of his past, but as proof that even the most terrible fires could be survived, and that those who survived could choose to build rather than destroy. The garden grew, the peace held, and life went on. Agreed stood. The ceremony will be tomorrow at noon. All colony residents and personnel will attend. Tonight, rest. You have earned it, Colonel Hayes. Left the hall, walking slowly back to his house. Behind him, the officers remained, staring at the battle reports still displayed on screen, trying to comprehend what they had learned. Stood alone, looking at the image of young Hayes in dragon armor. The young had called that man a coward. The shame of it would haunt him for the rest of his life. Hesitated, then answered, 7th Dragon Division, Terran Special Operations. Recognition flashed in his eyes. I knew of your division. We fought in the same battle, the final assault on the... Yes, Your Majesty. We will speak more later, said. Tonight, there are things we should discuss. He walked away, leaving standing in his garden, suddenly exposed to a past he had tried to leave buried. Maybe return to his planting, but I made my choice, I'm keeping it. In the distance, the outpost glowed with activity as they prepared for their emperor's arrival. None of them knew that in 2 weeks, everything would change. None of them knew who they had been mocking. But those stories were buried now, along with everything else from that war. Had made his choice. He would keep his peace, no matter what it cost his pride. Outside, the night settled over New Haven. In the distance, lights glowed from the new outpost. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new insults, perhaps. Closed his eyes and slept the sleep of a man who had nothing left to prove.